بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Alhamdulillah, continuing on with our tafsir sessions, we have reached Surah al-Fil. And before going into the surah, before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, this event took place. And what's very interesting is that, mashallah, Mu'akkam one time discussed in the chats that mu'jiza, a miracle, is something which establishes, and it is something which establishes the prophethood of a Nabi, of a prophet of Allah Azza wa Jal. But what happens if a miracle takes place prior to the prophet being born? So let's take the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What happened was, before he was born, this, as we're going to discuss inshallah in the Tafsir of Surah al-Fil, this miraculous event, this magnificent event took place. And this took place before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, but it was their same year. So when you look at if you look at the books that are written in regards to the seerah, the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they mention, and this year that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born is known as the year of al-Fil, the year of the elephant. Why? Because this event that we're going to discuss, that Surah al-Fil talks about and relates to, took place the year Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born. This in Arabic is known as ihras. Ihras means those events that took place prior to the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being born, and it was showing that a prophet of Allah, a wali or a prophet of Allah, was soon to come. And then the same year, the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took place. So now going to the tafsir of Surah al-Fil, the overview of this surah is that this surah, al-Fil, means elephant. What does that mean? That this chapter discusses the story of the people of the elephant. And like I mentioned, this incident took place the year the Prophet ﷺ was born. So if you open up the books of if you open up the books of Sirat, you will see that they know this year is known as al-Fil, the year of the elephant. Alongside this surah, it also highlights the significance of the Kaaba. That when you look into Tafsir of Surah al-Fil, and if you read the books and you see how Allah protected the Kaaba, how in the eyes of Allah, this Kaaba has so much significance that He sent an army to protect the Kaaba, the house of Allah. So this surah highlights the significance of the Kaaba. Similarly also, this surah also shows how Allah favored the people of Quraysh. That such a nation, a blessed nation, a blessed group of people, Allah favored them so much so that He protected them from such a punishment or such a bloody warfare. And it shows that Allah favored them. And what's the responsibility of the Quraysh? The responsibility of the Quraysh is now to worship Allah Azza wa Jal and not associate partners to Him. Because what makes Quraysh special? It's only to the mercy of Allah that they have become favored. They're like any other nation, but because Allah favored them with taking care, being the caretakers of the Kaaba, as we'll see in the surah, they had respect amongst the people, they had social status. Alongside that, they had respect in the eyes of Allah. And then we'll see how even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith that I am from the Quraysh. So this is the overview of the surah. This is what the surah talks about. And before going into the surah, we have to discuss the important event that took place. And this was the story of the people of the elephant. So what happened? Prior to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being born, a ruler by the name of Abraha, he ruled the area of, and was a ruler and governor of Yemen. So the Yemen Arabs at that time, everyone at that time, they were still, even though they were heavily involved in idol worshipping and paganism, they still had a lot of respect for the religion and teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay, so they still used to do the yearly Hajj, the pilgrimage. They used to come and they used to perform the Hajj and leave. So including the Yemen Arabs at that time, the Yemeni Arabs. So Abraha saw this, and he did not like this. It did not suit him, and it did not go easy with him. It did not run easy with him. So what did he do? He started making a cathedral, and he started building this cathedral. And his intention was that he wanted this cathedral to replace the Makkah, to replace the Kaaba. He wanted this specific cathedral, this monumental building that he built, to replace the Kaaba. In other words, he wanted people to start doing the pilgrimage of his cathedral his building and leave the pilgrimage, the Hajj of the Kaaba, the Bayt of Allah, the house of Allah. So he builds a huge cathedral. It's so big that if you're standing under it, you cannot see the top. It's full of any gems you can imagine, gold and silver. It's decorated with the most lavish elements at that time. And then he started telling people to come and do pilgrimage and start coming to and flocking to his cathedral in Yemen. And he started banning people and not allowing them to do the pilgrimage of the Kaaba. So what happened? The Arab at that time, they were not pleased with this. They were not happy. So narrations mention that one Qurayshi man, he comes and he defecates and he does number 2 in the cathedral. He goes, and as a sign of disrespect or as a sign of anger and as a sign of rebelliousness, to show rebellion, he goes and he defecates in the cathedral. So now what happens? Abraha finds out, and he finds out that the person who defecated in the cathedral was a Qurayshi man. So now Abraha is furious. He is aimed, and his goal is getting revenge. So now he intends on destroying the Kaaba, the house of Allah. So what happens? He sends word to Najashi, the ruler of the whole Ethiopian Abyssinian peninsula, and he tells Najashi that I intend on destroying the Kaaba, the house of Allah, that the Arabs worship, or the Arabs go to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. So now Najashi gives him one specific elephant, and that elephant was unusually large and very powerful, and that was nicknamed Mahmud. So alongside this specific elephant, Najashi also gave him 8 more elephants as reinforcements, and this is hence the name Fil, Ashab al-Fil, that you're going to see in the first ayah. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. That when you see in the first ayah, Allah addresses these people as Ashabul Fil, the people of the elephant. This is where the name came from, that they came to destroy the Kaaba riding elephants. And what was their intention? That they were going to wrap a rope around the Kaaba, each brick, and then wrap it on the neck of the elephant, and then pull each brick off the Kaaba and destroy the Kaaba brick by brick. This was their intention, to remove the house of Allah from the face of the earth. So now he starts coming and he starts making his way towards Mecca. And those Arabs at that time who tried to stop him, they were defeated. He would defeat one army after another army until he reached all the way to the outskirts of Mecca. And he reached the outskirts of Mecca, and he went to the area where the Arabs, the Mecca, the Quraysh at that time, they used to graze their animals. So these animals that were grazing this place that they were grazing their animals. So Abraha and his army caused all these animals to run away. Amongst those animals were 200 which belonged to the leader of the Quraysh at that time. 200 animals which belonged to the leader of the Quraysh. And who were the Quraysh? They were the ones who were the caretakers of the Kaaba in Mecca. And who was the leader of Quraysh? The very uncle, the very grandfather of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdul Muttalib. So Abdul Muttalib was the leader of the Quraysh. So now Abraha, he calls for Abdul Muttalib. While they're camping and they're waiting to attack the Kaaba outside on the outskirts of Mecca, he calls for Abdul Muttalib. And now when Abraha sees Abdul Muttalib, he's very impressed with Abdul Muttalib, the way he carried himself, his characteristics, the way he went about himself, his akhlaq, his good character. Everything impressed Abraha regarding Abdul Muttalib. So Abraha sits down with him. He gets off his throne and he actually takes a seat with Abdul Muttalib, and he asks what he wants. And Abdul Muttalib gives a strange response, and he says, all I want is the 200 camels that you caused for me to lose. And Abraha is astonished, and he says, I am here trying to destroy the city or destroy the Kaaba, and your only request is that you get the 200 camels back? And Abraha was disappointed in him. This is what Abraha tells Abdul Muttalib, that I'm disappointed in you, that I expected more of you. So what did Abdul Muttalib give response to? What was his response? A very unique and a very powerful response, where he says that I am the owner of the camels, so it's my responsibility to take care of the camels. But this Kaaba that you see over here, this is the house of Allah. That is the responsibility of Allah. Just like how I want to take care of my camels, Allah will take care of his own house, the Kaaba. And this is a warning he gave to Abraha. So when Abdul Muttalib went back, he told everyone to evacuate the city. And while he was evacuating the city, because he did not want any bloodshed to take place, he didn't want Abraha's army to come and do bad to the people of Quraysh. So Abdul Muttalib evacuated the city of Makkah. And while he was evacuating, he left making dua to Allah Azza wa Jalla, Ya Allah, this is your house. This is your place where people worship you. So protect the Kaaba. In other words, he was making dua to Allah to protect the Kaaba. So now Abraha comes. He's ready to attack. And when he comes to attack the Kaaba, the elephant refuses to move. It sits. It does not want to move. Now they're trying to make the elephant move. It doesn't want to move. What happens? It starts going backwards. If they face it towards Syria, it starts going towards Syria. If it faces towards Yemen, it starts going towards Yemen. But when it starts going to the Kaaba, towards the direction of the Kaaba, it refuses to move. They're trying to hit it. They're trying to strike it with iron rods. But no matter how much effort they put, this elephant refuses to move. While this is happening, Allah sends his army. And what was the army? Birds. And these birds that came, they were carrying, each one was carrying 3 stones, one in each claw and one in its beak. And these stones that were carrying, they came and it pelted the army of Abraha. And imagine pebbles. But what was the effect of those pebbles and those stones? That when they hit the skin, it pierced through skin. And it was more effective, and it pierced more than a bullet pierces us when we get hit with it, when we get shot with a gun. So imagine these stones were not any regular stones, that it pierced through a person's skin. So now this caused chaos amongst the army of Abraha, that they started running away, trying to recover, trying to gain refuge from these stones that are raining upon them, that are being showered upon them. So Abraha himself did not die in this specific occasion. Rather, he was inflicted with a very deadly disease, a kind of poison which spread throughout his body, that caused his limbs to rot. And his limbs literally started falling off of him one by one. Imagine his fingers started falling off of him one by one. So this was the punishment that Allah inflicted, and how Allah Ta'ala protected his Kaaba, that he literally sent birds carrying stones the size of pebbles. And these stones, or these that were made of clay, literally pierced through their skins, causing the whole army to be destroyed. And Abraha himself was inflicted with this very deadly disease. So Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, discussing this, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Allah Ta'ala is saying, have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephants? They literally came to destroy the house of Allah, and Allah took care of them. Birds were a means of the army, such a massive army being destroyed. So now in this verse, Allah Ta'ala is saying, addressing Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Alam tara. And the word tara in Arabic means, do you not see? Allah Ta'ala is saying, O Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, do you not see? Now what's strange is, we discussed that this event took place prior to the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But over here, Allah Ta'ala is saying, do you not see it, O Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? So what does this show? That this event was so widely known that it was as if the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself saw this event with his eyes. So Allah is saying, do you not see, O Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, how Allah, your Lord, dealt with the people of the elephant when they intended to destroy the house of Allah? Now what's interesting enough is Aisha and Asma radiallahu anhuma, they both narrate that they saw 2 camel drivers of the people of the elephant in their time. So 2 survivors, they stayed in Makkah. And what was their condition? They were both blind, they were paralyzed, and they used to go around begging. So this was the state, that people who intended on destroying the house of Allah, this is what Allah Ta'ala inflicted them with. Then Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, continuing, Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Do you not see how Allah Ta'ala made their plan in misguidance? وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ. Then Allah Ta'ala continues and says, and he sent against them swarms of birds, a flock of birds. This very army which was destroying and annihilating and defeating all those Arabs that stood in front of them. So now this army that was coming, and all those Arabs that stood in front of them, Abraha was defeating them. They were stopped by the army of Allah. And what was the army of Allah? Birds. Birds. And now, what's interesting is, Qurtubi mentions these birds were smaller than the size of a pigeon. And they were birds which were never ever seen. So a flock of birds came to destroy those who intended bad, those who wanted to get rid of the house of Allah. Then Allah Ta'ala continues, such birds, تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. Allah Ta'ala says these birds came and they struck them with stones of baked clay. And in Arabic, the word sijil is a Persian word. Sijil is a Persian word. Now, there's a difference of opinion among scholars that Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that Quran and Arabiya, that the Quran is all Arabic. But now the word sijil is Persian. So now, is this contradiction, yes or no? Because Allah Ta'ala says that the Quran is Arabic. Inna ja'alnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyya. Allah Ta'ala says multiple places in the Quran that this Quran is in the language of Arabic. That this Quran is Arabic language. But now this word sijil, tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil, is a Persian word. It means clay. So the scholars of the Quran, they mentioned that, yes, originally it was used as a Persian word, but it became so common amongst the Arabs that it also came to be known and it translated into the Arabic language. So the Arabic people at that time, the Arabs started using the word sijil. So there's no contradiction. And what is sijil? It refers to ordinary clay or refers to common clay, which is rolled into small balls and then baked to harden. So it's hardened balls of clay. Now, imagine clay. If someone hits you with clay right now, is it going to hurt? No, it's not. Yes, it will cause some inconvenience and it will bother you a little bit, but does it have the power to actually pierce through skin? No, it does not. It was only through the will of Allah, through the power of Allah, that Allah made these very pebbles or these stones of clay to pierce through their skin, like flame balls, pierce through their skin. And Ibn Abbas narrates something very unique and something very interesting and strange, where he says he found by Hani radiallahu anha 2 baskets of these stones. So now imagine these stones that were used to pelt the people of the elephant, Abraha and his army. Hani managed to gather some of these stones, the remainings of these stones. And Ibn Abbas narrates that each one of these stones had the name of the person who it was supposed to pelt. Subhanallah. It had the name of the person written, that this stone, this pebble, this ball of clay will pelt so-and-so and will cause him or pierce his specific part of his body. So very interesting, very fascinating, that it's scary. Imagine you see the name of the person, that this Allah Ta'ala wrote the name of each individual, that Allah Ta'ala will destroy through this very stone and very pebble. So very scary and very fascinating how Ibn Abbas is narrating that he saw with his own eyes these stones. And for example, it had Abraha's name, it had Hamra's name, it had so-and-so's name, that this stone will be a means of this person and it piercing his person's body. So now Allah Ta'ala continues on, فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ. Allah Ta'ala says he left them like straw eaten by cattle. So when you have straw, the word asf literally means scattered. It's usually scattered. The straw, when you have haystacks, what happens? It's scattered. Especially when an animal comes, what happens? The animals come, it starts eating it, and doesn't remain in the same state. So the same thing happened to the army of Abraha. Now when they saw this, chaos arose, and they started going crazy. They started running around. They were all disheveled. It was all wildness, and it was just people running to save themselves, every man for themselves, literally. So this caused the army of Abraha to be scattered. So Allah says he left them فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ, in a state of bewilderment and astonishment and confused and scattered, trying to look for mercy or trying to look for refuge, but to no avail. Allah Ta'ala's army came and wiped them all away. So now, to end this surah, this miraculous event, what happened, enhanced the Arabs. In other words, it caused the Arabs to even love the Quraysh even more. That they saw this, that wow, these people who take care of the Kaaba, Allah, they witnessed that these Quraysh, that Allah Ta'ala is protecting them and also protecting his house. So it caused the Arab, the different tribes at that time, to have more love for them. So now the Quraysh were now allowed to travel freely in the lands. So now they were allowed to start traveling to Yemen, for example, or to start traveling to Syria, and there was no fear of any highway robbers or anyone robbing them. Because imagine if you see someone who intended on destroying, you see a massive army coming to destroy the Kaaba, but Allah sends an army to destroy them, birds. So now which one wants to rob these people? Who has the himmat? Who has the courage to actually rob the Quraysh at that time? So the Arabs, they respected them, and the Quraysh were allowed to travel freely and untouched in the lands, in the territories, in the regular territories, in various territories, Syria, Yemen, without fear of any highway robbers, without being robbed. And they also enjoyed high status, right? They enjoyed high status. That the Arabs at that time, different tribes, they respected them. And this caused what? This caused the Quraysh at that time to flourish, that their economic prosperity flourished, because now they were allowed to travel in commercial activities to the neighboring states. They went to Syria, they went to Yemen. There was no fear of anyone robbing them. People welcomed them, that look, these are the people who take care of the house of Allah, and we don't want to mess with them. So this will cause people to respect them. So then Allah Ta'ala says in the next surah, Surah Quraysh, what does Allah Ta'ala say? An overview of the surah is, interestingly enough, that all commentators concur and agree that the subject matters of Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh are closely related. Because first Allah addresses the Quraysh, the people of Quraysh, that He protected you from the army of Abraha. And then He says, then it's responsibility and it's binding upon you, O Quraysh, that you worship Allah Azza wa Jal in return. So that's why if you look at some copies of the Quran, they do not have Surah Quraysh and Surah Fil as two separate chapters. Rather, they have it as one. So you'll see Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil, all the way to the end of Surah Quraysh as one complete surah, and there's no Bismillah. However, at the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, the consensus of the Sahaba at that time, and also Uthman, they decided to make Surah Fil, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil, and also Surah Quraysh li'ila fi Quraysh as two separate surahs. So now, Surah Quraysh specifically, it draws attention to Quraysh. Now they are able to make journeys for business, one in the time of winter and the other in the time of summer. And this surah also indicates that how Allah favored and how Allah accepted the Quraysh out of all tribes. That Quraysh experienced and witnessed and enjoyed benefits that other tribes did not necessarily enjoy. That the Quraysh were allowed to travel freely. There was no fear of getting robbed. There was no fear of being overtaken. There was no fear. Not only that, the tribes would also welcome them. So they would go to Syria, they would go to Yemen. Other tribes would always welcome them with a warm heart, with smiles on their face, that these are the people who take care of the house of Allah. So the Quraysh enjoyed certain economic benefits and prosperity that the other tribes did not necessarily enjoy and witness or experience. So Allah Ta'ala is saying in the Quran, لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, for the accustomed security of the Quraysh. Now what does this mean? For the accustomed security of the Quraysh. Allah Ta'ala says, now in this Arabic sentence, لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, according to rules of Arabic, this sentence has to be linked with another sentence. That what do you mean لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, for the security of the Quraysh? This is an incomplete sentence. So where is that sentence? What is that sentence that's missing over here? So there's different views. The first view is that this sentence لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ is connected to the previous surah. That Allah is saying that we destroyed inna ahlakna ashab al-fil. The Allah is saying in the previous surah how He mentioned that we destroyed the people of the elephant. Allah is saying He destroyed Abraha and his army. For what reason? لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, for the security of the Quraysh, so that the Quraysh can take journeys and trips, commercial trips for their business and economical reasons, and there is no obstacle in their way. So that's the first sentence that you can connect it to, you can link it to. The second sentence you can link into is that لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, that do you not see the security of the Quraysh? That Allah is saying one should wonder on the Quraysh and how they used to take the winter and summer journey in a time where freely and safely they had no fear, they had no worry about someone robbing them. Imagine right now if we walk in the streets, or at least back in the days, the streets of Bronx, for example, in New York City, how some people are scared in the nighttime. But imagine the Quraysh, that they had no fear of anyone robbing them. Rather, people respected them. So Allah Ta'ala is saying لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ. Then the Nabi Kareem Sallallahu mentions in the hadith, and also the superiority of the Quraysh, how Nabi Kareem Sallallahu mentions that verily Allah accepted Kinana from the offspring of Ismail alayhi salam, the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And from Kinana, Allah Ta'ala selected Quraysh from the progeny of Kinana. So Allah Ta'ala, Nabi Kareem Sallallahu is highlighting and showing how Allah Ta'ala always favored Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh. And then Nabi Kareem Sallallahu mentions in the hadith that I am from Quraysh. Another hadith which highlights the superiority and the value of Quraysh is the hadith where Rasulullah ﷺ mentions that people will follow Quraysh in matters of good as well as matters of evil. And this is a narration of Muslim, that people had so much respect for Quraysh that they were naturally born leaders. They were natural born leaders. And when people would see Quraysh doing good, they will follow them in good. And when people saw Quraysh doing bad, they will follow them in evil and that bad. And what was the reason for this? That because even in the darkest days, even in the days of paganism, when people were heavily involved in shirk, the Quraysh held on to their high morals and standards. Any of the morale that they had, morals that they had, and high standards, the Quraysh were very steadfast on this. And this is what caused them to have respect in the eyes of Allah. And this is what caused Quraysh to be the tribe, and which caused this tribe to be the caretakers of the house of Allah, which was the Kaaba in Makkah Sharif. The Allah continues, إِيلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. The Allah is saying that they accustomed security in the caravan of winter and summer. What does this mean? That Makkah, if you look, is a very harsh terrain. It's a very dry terrain, which doesn't allow for agricultural produce. You can't really grow produce. So the Quraysh were in a way forced, or they had to make trips to the neighboring territories, Syria, Yemen, Yathrib. Why? To get the necessities of life. They needed food, they needed fruits. That fruit and that food which was not able to grow in Makkah, they had to travel for that. So Allah is saying they would make two trips. One was in the winter time and one was in the summertime. And what was the purpose of this? To gain those necessities of life, that specific food, that specific fruit, and also economic trade. And what was the benefit of this? That after gaining great profit and gain, the Quraysh would come back to the city safe. And due to the respect of people, they would come back and people would respect them. Why? Because they were the caretakers of the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah continues in the Quran, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, that let them worship the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. That after all these favors, where Allah favored them to be the caretakers of the house of Allah, then Allah favored them, protected them from Abraha and his army. Then Allah allowed them to go to various territories, Yemen, Syria, Yathrib, without any fear of being robbed. So Allah says, it's binding upon them that they should worship Hadha al-Bayt, the Lord of this house. So what's interesting enough, what's fascinating and what's unique over here is amongst the many sifat, amongst the many attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, in this ayah, Hadha al-Bayt, Lord of this house, this attribute is singled out. Why did Allah not mention فَلْيَعْبُدُوا al-Rahim or فَلْيَعْبُدُوا al-Kareem? Why did Allah specifically mention فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ? Why did Allah specifically mention this specific attribute over here in this ayah, in this verse? Because it was due to this house of Allah, the Kaaba, that became a means of foundation or a source of Quraysh's flourishing and the Quraysh having blessings amongst the community. Because of them being the caretakers of the house of Allah, they enjoyed economic prosperity. Not only that, they enjoyed blessings from Allah. They had no fear when they were traveling. So it was because of this very house. So that's why Allah singled out this specific attribute. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Then Allah says finally, and he ends off the surah and he says, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. The Allah says, He is that being who fed them. Allah is the one who fed them from hunger and also saved them from fear. So now the first part of the verse, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ, it refers to, implies to, that they were provided all year round with every kind of fruit and food. Why? Because the Quraysh were allowed to travel. So Allah is saying He saved them from hunger. That despite being in a harsh terrain, despite being in a place where it was not able to hold agricultural produce, you cannot necessarily grow produce, crops, Allah still gave them the blessing of having every kind of fruit and food available to them. Then Allah says in the second part of the verse, وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. Allah says He protected them from fear. And what fear? Allah gave them security from enemies and robbers. Also, it can refer to that Allah gave them security and being safe from the punishment of the hereafter, with the condition that they fulfilled the conditions of had this iman with them. So now what lesson can we take from this surah, these two surahs? that Ibn Kathir mentions in his tafsir that whoever worships Allah according to his commands given in this verse, that you always worship Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah will give him safety, not only in this life but in the hereafter. So this is what we should take from the surah, that when we worship Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah will protect us in this life and the hereafter. One hadith that comes to mind, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that the one who performs Fajr in Jamaat, then Allah is his hafiz, Allah is his caretaker throughout the day, Allah is his protector, Allah is the one who is his harith, his guardian. And what better guardian do we want? What better caretaker do we want, protector, than Allah Azza wa Jal? And then the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam continues, and he challenges person, that he challenges, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam challenges the person that I dare you to cause the taklif to that person. This is the mafhum of the hadith, the understanding of the hadith. That Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that I dare that person to cause harm to the person who is the wali of Allah, the one who has Allah protecting him. So when we adopt the taqwa in our life, when we adopt the fear of Allah in our life, when we always come back to Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah will be the one who will grant us safety. Allah is the one who is hafiz. Allah is the one who has this quality of safeguarding and protecting us. So this is what we should do, that we should adopt this quality, that we should always go back to Allah Azza wa Jal. Any fear that we have, any harms that we have, any calamities that we have, all our answer lies in Allah Azza wa Jal. Anything that we have, we should always bring it back to Allah Azza wa Jal. And then that is the benefit of these two surahs, or this specific surah, that Abul Hasan Qazwini mentions that anyone who fears any enemy or any affliction, any calamity, should always recite the surah. لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. And it mentions in Tafsir Mazhari that whoever recites the surah at times of fear and danger, and he recites the surah, that fear and danger will be averted from him, and he will be protected from that fear and danger. So this is the lesson we could take from these two surahs, that we should look at first and foremost our blessings that we have. All these ni'mats that we have, an'am, these ni'mats, these blessings that we have in our life, we should make shukr to Allah Azza wa Jal for all these blessings, this kalima that we have, La ilaha illallah, which is a means of our salvation and success. That we should always come back to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. The same way how Allah Ta'ala told the people of Quraysh to worship Allah, similarly Allah Ta'ala tells us also to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. That the arms that I have, this intellect that I have, this understanding that I have, the fact that I can see any calamity that beflicts me, who is the only being that can protect us? Allah Azza wa Jal. So this is the lesson we can take from this surah, that we should never overlook the mercy and at the same time any blessings Allah gave us. Allah Ta'ala says, وَإِن تُعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you were to count the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal, you will never be able to count them. The blessings Allah gives us is infinite. So what is the least we can do? Worship Allah Azza wa Jal. Make shukr to Allah Azza wa Jal, that Ya Allah, you gave me everything. And what's the benefit? That this surah mentions that if you read the surah, this specific surah, لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ, Allah will protect you from any fear or enemy or any calamity. So may Allah give us tawfiq to act upon what has been said. May Allah give us tawfiq to read the surah, to take lesson, to learn from the people of the elephant, that these people who came to disrespect the masjid of Allah, to disrespect the house of Allah. How many times do we do disobedience? We disobey the house of Allah. We do be'adabi. We show disrespect to the house of Allah, or we don't pay our salahs on time. Yet Allah still gives us tawfiq to continue and have this kalima la ilaha illallah. So take these stories as lessons. في هذه العبرة إن في هذه القصص عبرة لأولي الألباب. Allah says in the Quran, عبرة لأولي الألباب, that in these stories that mentioned in the Quran, the story of the people of the past, the story of the people of the elephant, these are all, in all these stories is a lesson for us, that these people who went against the hukm of Allah, the obedience of Allah, Allah inflicted them with such a severe punishment. What is holding Allah from inflicting us with that severe punishment also? It is only from the mercy of Allah, the blessing of Allah, that He has not yet afflicted us with this punishment. So may Allah give us tawfiq to act upon what has been said. May Allah give us tawfiq to always make shukr to Allah Azza wa Jal, to ask from Allah Azza wa Jal, to seek refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal, to protect from any enemy that we have, or any calamity, that we only seek help in the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. And may Allah give us tawfiq to learn the seerah of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how the lives of the past, that when they went against the hukm of Allah, when they went against the will of Allah, what calamities went against them, or what calamities befell them, what calamities were they afflicted with. And may Allah give us tawfiq to always want to become better Muslims, to read the Quran, to understand the Quran, specifically the month of Ramadan, and come close to Allah Azza wa Jal, and prepare ourselves for the hereafter. I'll end off by this, and I'll say inshallah that these 10 days that we have, the middle 10 days are the means, or days of maghfirat, means of maghfirat, to gain the maghfirat of Allah Azza wa Jal. So let not these 10 days pass without us gaining the maghfirat of Allah Azza wa Jal, the forgiveness of Allah. And these du'as that we should, Rabbana faghfir lana dhunubana, how much sin we have, yet Allah still gives us tawfiq to have this kalimah. We should never lose hope in the mercy of Allah. That's number one. And number two, no matter how much sin we have, no matter how big it may be, no matter how small it may be, when we come back to Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah will always be there to forgive our sins. So may Allah give us tawfiq to act upon whatever has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.